your side, you will never see me coming. Go down.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to Wrestling Territories Podcast. I'm Troy, and tonight we're going to be talking about the 80s pro wrestling. What made 80s pro wrestling so good? I mean, we got to go back and take a look at all the things that happened in the 80s. I mean, the 80s were cool for a lot of things, right? You talk about movies, music, food. Professional wrestling was no different. Okay, so 80s. You just saw it right there in that intro. Yeah, I'm talking about the NWA, the WWF, the USWA, World Class, AWA, all of them. They were all huge in the 80s. And no matter where you were in a territory, it was big, right? I mean, it was on fire back in the 80s. And for people who didn't live through that, they don't understand it. So if you remember the 90s, so a lot of people talk about the 90s and things like that with the NWO, Nitro, things like that, the Monday Night Wars. Well, back in the 80s, we didn't have a Monday Night War. We had a territory war. We had all kinds of territories going on. And over time, those would dissipate or be bought out by either Vince McMahon or Jim Crockett mostly. But in the 80s, we had everybody trying to fight to survive. And so, in that survival part of it, you go back to what got it all started, which would be Starcade 83, the brainchild of Dusty Rhodes and Jim Crockett. And it was really absolutely a smart move by them. But later on, Vince McMahon would have his own idea called WrestleMania. So it was kind of a battle between Jim Crockett and Vince McMahon as they were trying to buy up everybody. But there was territories like I said, World Class, AWA, Pacific Northwest, Memphis territory, the Florida territory. They were all over the place. And just comment below and let me know what territory you were from. So as we move on, you think about it, Starcade was a big event, right? It was the granddaddy of them all. Still is, still always will be, right? Even though the WWF has now, shoved it away, so to speak, Starcade got the whole thing started. And a main event between Ric Flair and Harley Race was a big, huge sellout crowd in the Greensboro Coliseum. It was something that never really been done before. And so with this idea, they kept building upon it. So you had 84, 85, 86, 87, and 88 and 89. 89 was horrible. Let's not even talk about that. 88 went much better, and 87 wasn't really all that good either. But 83, 84, 85, and 86, those were good starcades. Enter Vince McMahon with WrestleMania, and then by the time WrestleMania comes around, it's the Rock and Wrestling time. So that's pretty cool too. I remember it vaguely, although um, it wasn't the WWF wasn't an area that I watched a lot of. It's mostly the Mid Atlantic. But with Vince McMahon's idea of putting rock and wrestling together, you had Wendy Richter, who was hanging out with Cyndi Lauper and Lou Albano, and they had all these things going on. You had superstars and Hollywood stars and singers all over the place. And Vince McMahon had a great idea, and it worked. You put Mr. T with Hulk Hogan against Roddy Piper and Paul Orndorff, who had Bob Orton out there as well. The main event was really good. It was it was one of those things, much like Starcade. It was a first for the WWF, and they took it and went just a step higher than Starcade and Jim Crockett by bringing the Hollywood celebrities on. So it was a smart move by Vince McMahon to do that, and then he just capitalized on it, and it's of course still today the longest running pay per view event ever. Now, AWA tried this thing called Super Clash. It didn't really work out as well, but they did do it, and it was Kerry Von Erich in Super Clash 3 defending his world class title against the AWA champion Jerry Lawler. Jerry Lawler wins it, kind of controversy with it, but Kerry Von Erich's just bleeding so badly it was just over with. But it didn't really help the AWA in the world class. They tried, but it didn't do much to help them out. But they had their own territories back in the day that was really moving real good. I mean, the Von Erichs were extremely popular in the Texas territory. I mean, like the Beatles, popular. And in the AWA, Vern Gagne had his own set of people, even Hulk Hogan at one time. And he had Mean Gene Okerlund, he had Bobby Heenan, he had a lot of guys that Vince McMahon eventually took away from him. Stole away, took away, signed, however you want to look at it. Either way, Vince McMahon was taking talent away from Vern Gagne left and right. And it worked out for Vince, but not so good for Vern Gagne, unfortunately. Now, keep going on back to world class days. And you go back and take a look at that. The world class was, like I say, extremely popular with the Von Erichs. You had the Von Erichs feud with the Freebirds. That was very huge and popular. Chris Adams, Gino Hernandez, just anybody feuded with the Von Erichs, it was over. It was huge and making a sellout crowd. And then what was it? The memorial for David Flair, David Von Erich. I'm sorry, Ric Flair versus Kerry Von Erich for the NWA World Title. Kerry Von Erich becomes the champion. A few weeks later, drops it back to Flair. It, that didn't really help out World Class too much, really. But it did spawn World Class to be its own organization without the NWA, and they created their own world title. But again, it didn't help them in the long run, unfortunately. So the other territories like Florida, Central States, Mid South, UWF, was eventually bought out by Jim Crockett. But the UWF had a pretty cool little situation going when it was on the Mid South. They had JYD, the Junkyard Dog, who was like totally popular in their organization. They had Hacksaw Jim Duggan, Ted DiBiase, Dr. Des T. Williams, and a whole lot of others. He had a stacked lineup full of good wrestlers. And over time, again, they started going away. Especially with somebody like Ted DiBiase, who took off, and he's gone to the WWF to become the $1 Million Man. Uh, it didn't really help that he lost a lot of the talent. But JYD being another one, Hacksaw Jim Duggan being another one, going to the WWF. So again, Vince McMahon taking talent away from the Mid South territory, much like he did the AWA. And by the time Jim Crockett purchased it, it was kind of a shell of his former self. But the UWF had its own big fanfare, and boy, was there some good matches. If you go back on YouTube and find them, you'll see, people like Terry Taylor, Eddie Gilbert, the feuds they had and everything that went on there. But then Crockett purchased them, and that was the end of that. The Memphis territory with Jerry Lawler was real popular. A lot of names come through there, like the Midnight Express, the Rock and Roll Express. The Midnight Rockers were there for a bit. Sting and Ultimate Warrior, they were there for a while. So the Memphis territory turned out a lot of good players, a lot of good wrestlers. But unfortunately, even though Memphis carried on for quite some time, even while the other territories were falling, again, Vince McMahon taking talent mostly, Jim Crockett taking a little bit of talent, not a lot, but it really didn't help. But the Memphis territory on fire back in the day. Like I said, Jerry Lawler was the man in Memphis. So again, what made the '80s professional wrestling so popular? You had the innovation of like WrestleMania, Starrcade, the innovation of War Games, the Great American Bash. The War Games was a very unique concept made up by Dusty Rhodes, and it's still being used today in the WWF at Survivor Series. Matter of fact, that's coming up this coming tonight. As a matter of fact, after you watch this podcast here on Saturday, it will be War Games Survivor Series. So it should be really good. So if you've got the Peacock Network, go check that out. It'll be a real good night of wrestling. The Bloodline, the whole situation. Yeah, I'll definitely be checking that out. War Games, Starrcade, the Horseman. The Horseman is what really got the Crockett promotion going in a major direction. Their popularity and the lack thereof, and the much love of Dusty Rhodes and the Road Warriors and Rock and Roll Express, who was massively over. And the Rock and Roll Express being another team that came from the Mid South area by way of Memphis. And so the popularity there and the hatred towards the Horsemen really got things moving, and the War Games made things really cool. The scaffold match with the Road Warriors, and even though that was used, I believe, in the Mid South before that with the Rock and Roll Express and Midnight Express. But it really got over at Starrcade '86 when the Road Warriors took on the Midnight Express. It was, I mean, the people loved. I loved it. I think it's one of my favorite matches. But so that was really, so the invention of these unique matches helped put people's butts in the seat, so to speak. Vince McMahon came up with this thing called the Survivor Series, which was a pretty cool concept. Usually 5-on-5, and as you got pinned or submit, you had to leave and go to the back, and sometimes your team was at a disadvantage. But it's almost like a reversed war games in a way. But anyway, Survivor Series was a good concept. Along with the Royal Rumble that came along, I believe it was 88, I believe, 87 or 88. Anyway, a good idea. A very unique concept, taking the Battle Royal, taking it to a whole different level, and, coming out by number or whatever, and 1 through 30. And then later on, implementing the fact that if you won the Royal Rumble, you got a shot at the world title at WrestleMania. So smart move there by the WWF. Again, the entertaining part of it, good. These matches ideas, good. These pay-per-view ideas, good. They all worked out. And in the 80s, we just had a lot of variety of stuff. Much like I said, music, movies, foods, all kinds of fun stuff. So the 80s will always be remembered for fun, unique, pulp culture time. I know on my TikTok page, if you don't follow me there, please go check that out. I'll put the link in the description. But I put up clips around 60 seconds of professional wrestling from the 80s, all over the territories, and always enjoy seeing the comments that come with it, the likes that come with it, people enjoying them. Some of my views get up there pretty good. So people remember, it's like a time to remember and reflect on a fun era of professional wrestling. And I'll never forget it because as a kid growing up watching it, it was totally exciting. And I kind of lost favor with wrestling in the early 90s until about Nitro time when Nitro came along and the NWO. That's when wrestling got real good again. But the 80s will always be remembered. If you got the Peacock Network, you can go back and watch a lot of that old stuff from the WWF, some AWA, some world class stuff, and NWA stuff. So if you go back and watch all that, and if you've never seen it before, if you didn't live through the 80s like I did, this is a good way to go back and look at it and enjoy it. So anyway, I hope you like this little short podcast that I do here on YouTube. If you do, leave a thumbs up, leave that like button going and shine it up, and hit that subscribe button wherever it is. Right there. Subscribe button, hit that subscribe button for me. And until next time, God bless. I'll see you soon.